Imagine you are, just an absolute rock star at your job. I mean, you know the complex patterns in your field, you ship the really hard projects, and you basically eat pressure for breakfast.
Right, you have that proven track record. High-stakes situations just don't make you break a sweat.
Exactly. You are operating at peak capacity, but then you switch to a new environment. Maybe it's a new team or a different company that just simply doesn't ask very much of you.
Yeah, the deadlines are soft, the standards are noticeably lower, nobody's really, challenging your output.
And at first, it feels like a well-deserved vacation, right? Months pass in this really comfortable, lazy rhythm, but then one day, a real task actually lands on your desk.
Just a normal task, nothing exotic.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of moderately hard work you used to knock out before lunch. You sit down, you do the work, and by the time you finish it, you are completely physically and mentally wiped out.
Just totally drained.
You go home completely confused because you look at the work and realize you haven't forgotten how to do it. The skills are still incredibly sharp, so you're left wondering, where did your drive actually go?
Okay, let's unpack this, because that drop in stamina makes perfect sense when you look at it clearly. It is exactly like a smartphone.
Oh, that's a really good way to look at it.
Right, because if you take your phone and leave it sitting on a desk without touching it, it doesn't keep the screen at maximum brightness and leave all your background apps refreshing at full speed.
It adapts to what's happening.
Exactly. It senses the lack of active demand, it dims the screen, suspends the background activity, and drops into low power mode to preserve the battery. Your brain is essentially doing the exact same thing when you land in a low-demand job.
Yeah.
It's quietly putting your cognitive stamina into low-power mode.
Right, because your brain optimized it away. What you're experiencing in that moment isn't, a sudden loss of talent or some tragic decline in your intelligence. The brain doesn't maintain your maximum operational capacity out of some nostalgic respect for your professional history. It doesn't care what you did last year.
No, not at all. It's a ruthlessly efficient biological machine. It is constantly scanning the current demands of your environment and cutting its energy allocation accordingly. If the environment demands less, the brain prepares for less.
So it's not a character flaw or creeping laziness?
No, it's basic survival optimization. From a biological standpoint, your brain looks at the situation and says, why would we continue to burn precious caloric fuel to maintain a level of readiness that we haven't needed in 6 months? The hard drive is perfectly fine, but the battery has been capped.
Wow, so your institutional knowledge and your technical skills are all just sitting there intact.
Yes, but the mental stamina required to sustain hard, focused work lowers to match your new normal. And the really insidious part is that you don't feel this erosion happening day to day.
Because nothing in that soft environment is testing your limits.
Precisely. You only discover the massive deficit when an unexpected challenge forces you to bridge the gap between knowing how to do something and actually having the energy to execute it. The environment handed you easy days, and the gap between your skill and your stamina just widened.
So how do you fix it?
Well, the only effective countermeasure here is to artificially maintain the demand yourselves. You have to run extra laps in an empty stadium. You have to hold the standard for yourself, even when absolutely no one else around you is asking for it.
But doing that requires a ridiculous amount of intrinsic motivation. I mean, you are putting in an extra effort entirely for yourself. Your current team isn't going to notice the difference between good and great.
And leadership certainly isn't going to reward you for it. It will feel incredibly draining and almost pointless at first because, there's no crowd cheering for you in that empty stadium.
Yeah, it's just you.
But every single time you push the work to that higher standard anyway, you are actively overriding your brain's instinct to power down. You keep your capacity trained. You're not doing this out of loyalty to a lazy team. You're doing this so you don't get blindsided when you move to a better environment.
Because you will move somewhere better eventually.
Right. And the critical question you have to answer now is how much of your professional capability you'll have kept intact by the time you finally get there.
It's funny, though, running those extra laps in an empty stadium and holding that high standard inevitably creates a whole new problem. When you're constantly putting in the work and getting undeniable results, you start attracting friction. You attract the naysayers, you share some genuinely good news in a group chat like a project launch, and immediately someone chimes in to find the asterisk. They say, well, the market was really favorable, so that was mostly luck. Right?
Well, you're in a meeting and you pitch a brilliant idea that leadership loves.
Yes, and there's always that one person sitting in the corner with their arms crossed, eagerly explaining exactly why your idea won't scale. They're always watching, but they are never actually building anything themselves.
They're the eternal auditors of everyone else's effort. And when you encounter them, your visceral instinct is to engage. You want to defend your work
Of course. You want to show your reasoning and bring up the spreadsheets and present the hard evidence. You want to mathematically force them to see the value of what you're doing.
because you're operating under the logical assumption that if your argument is solid enough, they will surely come around.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Why do we universally feel this burning need to bring the receipts? We compile a track record, a full timeline of results, a flawless logical defense, totally convinced that the evidence will win the day. And yet, that mountain of evidence never actually changes their minds. Why doesn't it work?
Because they aren't actually engaging with your argument. Your logic, your data, and your receipts are just scenery to them.
Just scenery. Wow.
Yeah, they didn't enter the conversation to discover the truth.
Yeah.
They came specifically to poke holes. They will always find a way to explain away your success because the friction they're creating has absolutely nothing to do with the quality of your work.
It's about them.
Exactly. There is a psychological reality we have to acknowledge here. Watching you actively build something makes their own inaction feel deafeningly loud. It is significantly easier to sit back and audit everyone else's wins than to take the risk of going out and getting your own.
Which makes sense. I mean, we can hold some empathy for that underlying insecurity, but tactically speaking, engaging with it is a massive trap. Wait, but if I just put my head down and keep working, doesn't that make me look weak?
That is the fear, right?
Yeah, like if I don't passionately defend my project in that meeting, won't leadership just assume the naysayer is right and that my idea actually is flawed?
Well, there is a profound difference between addressing a legitimate stakeholder concern and arguing with a dedicated naysayer. Leaders who actually build things can tell the difference. Defending the work to a critic who is committed to misunderstanding you stops the work itself.
So you just ignore them.
The most effective strategy is to simply keep building. And you don't continue building to prove them wrong, because trying to prove them wrong means you're still playing their game on their terms.
Right. You keep building because that is exactly what you were doing before they showed up. They're just background noise with a front row seat.
Think about the outcomes here. Best case scenario, your continuous results eventually force them to go quiet because you can't argue with undeniable wins.
And worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario, you continue to accumulate wins while they continue to find increasingly creative complaints. Either way, you win. The only conceivable scenario where you actually lose is the one where you stop building your project to go argue with them.
Because giving them that energy is a massive drain on the exact mental stamina we just talked about protecting. And it is so wild how fiercely we'll defend our energy when a naysayer attacks our work, but will willingly hand over that exact same energy just to avoid a little social friction.
Oh, absolutely. We do it all the time.
Like those classic dinner parties. You get an invitation to a dinner that you absolutely do not want to attend. You know it's going to be tedious, but you say yes anyway.
Because you feel obligated.
Exactly. So you show up, you sit through 2 agonizing hours of conversation you have zero interest in, you check your phone under the table, and you finally drive home feeling completely drained. Meanwhile, the host had a fantastic time and has no idea you were miserable. So what does this all mean for you? You're basically trading 2 seconds of awkwardness up front for 2 solid hours of going through the motions. That is a terrible trade.
It really is. That invisible drain is the heavy cost of a no that you refuse to say. When someone extends an offer or an invitation, we instinctively internalize it as a debt. Someone went out of their way to include you, so declining feels inherently ungrateful.
We worry that saying no makes us the difficult person. But what if it's a family thing or a major networking event? Aren't there times we just have to swallow the awkwardness and show up?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, showing up out of pure resentment doesn't serve anyone. When you say yes to something you genuinely do not want to do, both people ultimately lose.
How does the other person lose if they got what they wanted?
Because they successfully got your physical body into a chair, but they didn't get your actual attention or engagement. A clean, honest no up front is cheaper and more respectful for everyone involved.
That's a really good point. We're conflating 2 entirely distinct actions. The offer was theirs to make, but the answer is yours to give. Those are 2 separate things.
And you don't owe them a yes just because they initiated the interaction. Every single time you go along with an unwanted obligation, just to avoid that tiny initial friction, it gets slightly easier to cave the next time. You tell yourself you're just keeping the peace, But what you're actually doing is systematically getting worse at standing your ground.
You're losing that muscle.
Exactly. No is a complete answer. You are allowed to decline things that aren't right for you. And asserting that boundary isn't rudeness, it's just knowing what you want and communicating it honestly.
And our profound inability to enforce that simple boundary isn't restricted to face-to-face interactions. It completely dictates our relationship with our screens. We can't say no to people in our living rooms, and we definitely aren't saying no to the algorithms in our pockets.
Oh, the digital boundaries are completely eroded for most people.
Right, we open an app, and immediately we see the exact same frustrating content bloating the feed. Within 30 seconds, we're annoyed. The exact type of content that irritated us yesterday is pushed into our faces again today. It feels as though the algorithm is actively daring us to react to it.
That's because the fundamental nature of these platforms has shifted entirely. They've moved away from showing you what your actual connections are posting and evolved into interest media.
Interest media, what does that mean exactly?
The feed is a highly aggressive prediction engine, constantly trying to figure out your next psychological hit to keep you scrolling. But the mechanism of how this engine learns is deeply flawed. It measures engagement, not enjoyment.
So it doesn't care if you actually like the video.
Not at all. If you hover over a deeply frustrating video for 2 extra seconds just out of pure stunned disbelief, the machine logs that hesitation as engagement. It drops you into the wrong behavioral bucket, and suddenly it thinks you love being angry.
That explains so much. Now, your daily feed is composed of 60% content you never asked for and actively dislike, which is incredibly annoying. But we actually have the power to control it. There is a literal button designed for this exact problem.
The mute button.
Yes, whether it's called mute or unfollow or see less of this, you're explicitly telling the machine to stop serving you that content. Yet we hesitate to use it. There is this deep, bizarre psychological guilt attached to the mute button. We feel like muting someone online is the equivalent of walking up to them in real life and slapping a hand over their mouth while they're speaking.
We have to dismantle that guilt completely.
Yeah.
Because the two scenarios are nothing alike. Muting someone online is not silencing them. Nobody receives a notification that you muted them. The creator has absolutely no idea.
So it's not aggressive at all.
Right. This action isn't about them at all. It's strictly about protecting what you allow into your own headspace. You're already spending time on the platform. The only question is whether you spend that time consuming material that drains you or material that adds value to your day.
But it feels like even when I do use that button, the bad content just comes right back.
Because you have to understand that this curation process requires immense patience. It takes days, sometimes weeks, to effectively train a feed. Algorithms are incredibly stubborn. They will continuously test your boundaries, pushing bad content back into your view just to see if you'll click it again.
So you just have to keep doing it.
Exactly. Curating your digital boundaries isn't a one-time fix. It is ongoing, necessary maintenance for your mind.
Okay, so if we're fiercely guarding all this forward momentum from naysayers in the office, from unwanted dinner parties, and from aggressive algorithms, what happens when the roadblock isn't a person or an app, but just life?
That is the ultimate test.
Once you've protected your headspace, how do you make sure that life's inevitable, unpredictable changes don't stop you dead in your tracks?
You've got to apply the fundamental logic of financial planning to the rest of your life. Financial advisors universally recommend diversifying your investments across different industries. The logic is bulletproof. When one sector takes a massive hit, the others keep your portfolio afloat.
Because you're not going to win every single bet.
Right. But by diversifying, you ensure that you stay in the green overall. We have to apply that exact same principle to our professional goals and timelines.
How does that look in practice, though?
Well, imagine you find the perfect company. The culture is incredible, the role is exactly what you want, and you go all in on that single application. You wait weeks for a response, having all your hopes on this one outcome.
And then the rejection email lands.
Exactly. Because you bet your entire timeline on that one opportunity, you are instantly deflated, completely devoid of momentum, and forced all the way back to square one.
But doesn't keeping backup options make it look like I lack commitment? And if I'm applying to 2 or 3 other companies, am I not taking the dream job seriously enough?
Not at all. Having a pipeline of options is not a lack of commitment. It is momentum protection. The dream job remains the primary target, but you are refusing to bet your entire forward motion on a single point of failure. You're ensuring that one single no from one specific hiring manager doesn't destroy your progress.
That makes total sense. I look at this exactly like a solid routine at the gym. If your entire workout regimen depends on using one highly specific machine, you've made yourself incredibly fragile. You walk into the gym, you see someone sitting on that specific bench, and your brain immediately offers you the excuse to just go home.
Yes, you're always one bad variable away from doing absolutely nothing.
Exactly. If the bench is taken, a small pool of options turns that minor inconvenience into a full-blown excuse to skip the workout. But if your pool of alternative exercises is large and diversified, a taken bench is no longer an excuse. It's just today's constraint. You adapt, you select a different movement, and you still put in the work.
And this exact logic applies directly to problem solving in any environment. You might analyze a situation, land on what feels like the perfect theoretical solution, and build your entire strategy around it. Then, reality intervenes,
Like a stakeholder suddenly slashes the budget by half.
or a client completely reframes the core requirement. If you only ever built one single path forward, you aren't just pivoting when that roadblock hits, you are completely rebuilding your solution from scratch.
Which takes massive energy.
But if you walk into that room with 2 or 3 alternative approaches already modeled out, you just shift tracks. The problem doesn't stop your momentum because you have multiple predefined ways forward. The pattern holds true across every domain.
Life is always going to throw those roadblocks.
Right. Life will constantly change your timelines, alter your conditions, and restrict your available resources without warning. The people who consistently maintain their forward momentum are the ones who intentionally build multiple options into their plans from the very beginning. By diversifying their approaches, they ensure that no single change or rejection can force them to stop. They never have to rebuild from zero, they only have to pivot to the next available option.
So, what does this all mean? If your brain constantly optimizes to its environment, and you've now flawlessly curated your life with multiple options, muted all the annoyances, and learned to seamlessly say no to every friction, what happens to your resilience when a truly unavoidable, unmutable hardship arrives? Will a perfectly frictionless life leave you entirely without the stamina for uncontrollable chaos?